All right, thanks everyone for being able to join on today. You're on for a 90-minute Data Explorer webinar. I'll clear out your guys' results. How many of you have been using Looker for, let's say, 1 to 3 months? So, relatively new. Awesome, got some new people. Okay, good, fair amount, like a fourth of the class. And then who on here has been using Looker for, let's say, more than 4 months, let's say? Gotcha. Okay, so everyone's like fairly new. Awesome. So hopefully for the ones who've been using Looker longer, you'll still hopefully get something out of this. Today we'll be focusing a lot on the Explore interface. That's what you guys will be able to interact with. And then I'll also be demoing through how to build like a dashboard. So just quick overview of the agenda. We'll go through a quick introduction of navigating around Looker. Then we'll dive into some analytic concepts. And then we'll work on analyzing some data, doing that through the Explore interface in Looker, which you'll learn if you're new what that is. And then lastly, building dashboards as well. So quick overview of Looker. I am going to drag onto my screen so you guys can see it. Does everyone see my homepage now? Fairly standard Looker homepage. And so this is sort of probably like what a lot of your instances when you probably first start Looker, that's what they look like. That's what they look like. And so you'll notice that there's, probably a top folder section up here. This is obviously it's messy because it's our teach instance, but you can imagine that you may have specific folders for different departments like finance or marketing, or you may have like special teams inside of your organization. So this is the more classic way of organizing inside of Looker. At the end, I'll go into the newer way, essentially, that you may be able to use something called boards to organize your content. Additionally, you can also navigate Looker utilizing the recently viewed. This will allow you to see like, oh, I opened up this dashboard, yesterday, I forgot to favorite it or something. This is how you can get to those. And then also you can see over here that there's an icon. Used to be a purple heart, it's now blue. A blue heart, and this will allow you to save to your favorites, which is again accessible over in this left-hand panel. So you can see what's favorited. I'm going to open up this dashboard in a new tab. And you can see this is just, like a standard business pulse inside of Looker. You'll see that that heart there for favoriting is available. And we'll walk through more of the functionality of dashboards later. But again, it's very easy to get to. And then you're able to click back here to go back to the folder that this dashboard is stored inside of. If I click back to my favorite sections, there's also a popular area inside of Looker. You can change it to be all users or a specific group inside of your organization. And you can see, obviously, I favorited the most popular dashboard that we all look at. But you can also see other types of content that's popular within your organization, or you can filter it down to like the finance group. This is a good way if you're trying to identify what are the best ways of looking around specific content in your organization. And the next is you also do have your own personal folder over here as well. So if you click into your own personal folder, we envision this as more of a prototyping area. So I'll save, when I'm doing Looker work is I'll just sort of save it into my personal folder. And then those shared folders that we discussed first, those are more of the content that we, say like, oh, this is more readily able to share with everyone. And then you can also, if you're not in a closed system, which most people aren't, you'll see that there is a people's folder, and you are able to see all of your different colleagues as well. So, if Aaron was like, hey, I have like a dashboard in my folder that I want you to go look at, you are able to go in there, and if you had something, you would be able to see any dashboards or looks that he's been working on. So it's a way to like cross-collaborate with your coworkers without necessarily having to work inside of this like shared folder area. One of the newer things inside of Looker in terms of content curation is we have created boards as well. They're like Pinterest boards. You can create different sections and you can pin content to them from anywhere in the instance. So you can imagine having like a marketing board or a finance board that pulls together a series of different looks or dashboards that the finance team uses. And you can also have your admin set these boards as like home pages for people so that when you come into Looker, you actually load to like a board instead of like the shared folders directory as well. So it just sort of helps if you create a whole bunch of different boards inside your organization. It's a little bit easier to navigate around because it's not that immediate, like look at all these folders. You're actually presented with content, you know, one click sooner essentially. What we'll be focusing on today is more on this explore section. Inside of browse, all of the same links that are available here on this left-hand panel are available in the drop-down menu. The one we'll be focusing on today is the Explore tab. And inside of this one, obviously we have a bunch of different explores, but this is where if you're going to ask a question about a specific set of data inside your organization, this is one jumping off area that you can do that by loading up a fresh Explore and going in this way. Or if you're on like this Business Pulse, you can also say, hey, I want to go explore and you guys can hear me again. Sorry about that. I believe you can. Perfect. My Bluetooth just really decided to go all out on me, and so I lost my keyboard, mouse, headphones. So you can also go from Explore from here on any dashboard or look to say like, oh, instead of the past 90, maybe I wanted to look at the past 1 year, for example. And so you can start off with something like that by pretty quickly, easily starting to ask new questions about your data. Yeah. Let me give me 1 second. I'll increase the volume of my mic. Is that better? I'll give you guys like a second just to make sure I didn't blast anybody's speakers. Is the volume clear? Okay, cool. And so, new ways that you can start asking new questions. There's also new features if you have the new IDE enabled, where you can, clear just the fields in your report, but you can keep the filters as well. So it's a really easy way to, when you're doing data explore that you can usually the filters you want to keep, but you'll end up selecting like new fields or something. So you'll be able to play around with that later today. So in terms of navigating around Looker, oh, and then lastly, of course, sorry, you can also use the search bar up here. This search will search everything. So if you know like the name of a dashboard you're looking for, using the search bar is probably the easiest way if you only know the name. And then also like inside of your organization, you can either, you know, favorite things, or you can also use like Chrome bookmarks as well. And you also may like in Slack or Microsoft Teams or Google Chat, you can also, you know, everything in Looker in the URL has like a numeric identifier typically. So you may be like talking to a coworker on chat and you may be like, oh, hey, head over to board 112, just because it's a relatively easy way to share things as well. So any questions in regards to navigating, you know, around Looker, creating folders, things like that? Alrighty. So what we're going to be talking through today is 4 main analytical concepts. You've probably heard of them. They're very important to understanding Looker and just making sure that you're comfortable with answering questions from your business analysts, or if you are the analyst, you're answering them for yourself. And so you'll see a lot of this terminology inside of Looker. So the first one is a dimension. These are essentially the columns of your data, and they should be, in theory, physically represented in the world. We're going to walk through an example later today regarding a fruit basket. So you can imagine that you went to the grocery store and purchased some fruit. But you can also look, if you have like a pen on your desk, you know, you may have like a pin. What color is it? How long is it? What color is the ink? Those are all like descriptions of the pen on your desk. And that's what we would call dimensions of data. You also have measures. So measures are where you're counting or summing or weighing things, and you're taking multiple rows to do that. So in my pen example, I only have a pen on my desk because I really don't use it. So I have 1 pen. I counted it as 1. That's what I would call a measure. Filtering is where we go into limit data. We'll go through 2 different types of filters. One is a dimensional filter, which will probably be 99% of what you do, versus a measure filter. But filtering limits the scope of your data. And then lastly, pivots. A little confusing. It's how you display data. If you've ever used Excel and you're comfortable with like pivot tables, it's the exact same concept in Looker as well. So this allows you to see categories sort of more horizontally, and we'll walk through some examples of that. So when the fruit basket example, you'll see on here we have like sort of some cute little images of, you know, we went to a grocery store and we bought a bunch of different fruit. And so you can imagine that this is probably pretty similar to like if you were a grocery store analyzing the data. This is very representative of like the type of data that they have. And we can imagine that this is, you know, per se, like one customer purchase. So you can see here for each row of the data, we have a different piece of fruit and some additional dimensional data about it. You know, what color is it? Is it round or not? The price, the weight, price per pound, sorry, the weight of the object, and then also the final price as well. So you can see that, you know, even within the first 3 rows of the apple, you know, my first 2 apples, you know, might be like Fuji apples, but my third one down here is a Golden Delicious, and you can see that, you know, it's a little bit cheaper than my Fuji apples. So walking into this practice data example, contextualize it for yourself, because that'll sort of help as you walk through the exercise when you're thinking about the problems. So if we were going to pull in what type of fruits are in the basket. Think to yourself, how many rows of data would I get back if I ask you about the types of fruit? So if you look over, before I show the answer, just think in your head, if you had selected that column of dimension called type of fruit, how many rows would return in Looker or in this example? So you'll always see 5. And the reason for that is whenever you select a dimension in Looker, it will always return only the unique fruit names. So you might have thought originally, before I showed the answer, that you would have expected there to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 fruits, but there's only 5 fruit types. So it's important to remember every time you select a singular dimension in Looker, it's always going to return the unique set or just the unique values in that column. So you'll see we have 5 different types of fruit, and you can see in the image on the left that we have, the apples grouped together and the lemons, bananas, limes, and oranges. So because we didn't select color, for example, the apples are still grouped together because we just were asking about the fruit type. So this type of answer, if somebody said, how many different types of fruit did the customer buy, you would say 5. When we ask for a different side of it, let's say what colors did the customer purchase, the answer that you would see inside of Looker for this is only 4. And the reason for that is that there's only 4 colors in the basket itself. We weren't asking about the fruit anymore. We were purely just asking about the colors. So again, we get a unique set of 4 colors. Now, the complication comes along when we ask about, well, what combinations of fruit and color were in the fruit basket. So indicative to the image on the left, the result set that you would see in Looker is 6. And the reason for that is because our apples were both red and green. So that's why we have 6 instead of 5 now, because apple is represented at row 1 and at row 6 for each of the different colors. So when you select 2 or many dimensions, you'll see the unique combinations of those 2 dimensions that physically exist inside of your data. So, we didn't have any green bananas, for example, so that we don't have a row in here for banana that was green. We only had yellow bananas in our original data set. Any questions on dimensions and how Looker returns always a unique set and a unique combination? All right. So the next thing we're going to move on to then is measures. So if you remember from when we were walking through them, dimensions was asking about descriptions of the data itself. Measures asks more around how many, how much, those types of questions. And measures typically have to do with pulling an aggregation of multiple rows. So this is our practice data set, exactly the same as before. But we're first going to ask the question of how many pieces of fruit are in the basket. So you can imagine me when I was hand counting, and I think I said 12. You physically had to hear me, take my pen that I have on my desk and work through the data manually to count it out. What a count function does inside of a database is it does it a lot faster for you. So if you select a count dimension inside of Looker and I counted correctly, you'll see that we get a result set of 12. And so a count measure will answer how many of something. So I was able to, manually count it out myself earlier, but you can use a count measure inside of the database, and it'll count each individual row in your results. The next type of question that would be logically asked is how much does the basket weigh? So if you think back to that original result set, we had price per pound, and we also had a weight dimension as well. And so what you would want to do is manually, if you were going through that result set, you would sum together all of those different weights or adding them together. So a total weight measure inside of Looker by using a sum calculation would get us to the weight of 4.91. And so that's how much our basket weighs as you're taking it around the grocery store with you of just the fruit that you purchased. You may weigh more if you purchased more. So any questions on measures? These are definitely going to be more of the KPIs you have inside of your own organization, like total revenue, how much did the customer, what was the average purchase price, average basket value, anything like that. Those are the KPIs that your LookML developer will have defined for you as measures typically. So we've been working through different types of analysis. We purely looked at a singular dimension. Now we'll want to look at, and we've looked at singular measures, but probably what you're looking for is like the combination of the two. So same practice data set, but if we asked about how many pieces of each fruit type were in the basket. So originally my question was how many types of fruit? We knew that there were 5, but what if you wanted to know how many of those 5 each, right? So if you select the fruit type dimension and the count measure, now we'll see that the most popular items that the person purchased were apples and lemons, and then limes, bananas, and oranges were less popular. So if you're looking for, trying to determine, popularity of something, a count is typically a way that you would achieve that. If you ask about the total cost, though, just because you purchase a bunch of apples, typically apples are sort of cheaper. So it might not be the most expensive item purchased, though. So if you pulled in, again, the fruit type with the total price, apple's still the most expensive, but you'll see that, lemons and oranges were the same cost, even though you only purchased 2 oranges. So with total price, you would be able to see, when we did the count, it was saying, purely the number of items purchased with what was the most popular, versus asking the question about total price, we'll say, well, what got spent the most, or what fruit was the top driver of revenue? Those types of questions would be answered by bringing in a total price measure or something like that. So any questions on combining together, specific dimensions? In the examples we walked through, we had fruit type, and we had those 2 different measures that we had worked through earlier. Any questions on those? Alrighty. So the next one we'll work through then is filtering. So filtering dimensions is probably, like I was saying earlier, the 99% type of filtering you're going to do in Looker. So when we get to filtering, though, when you filter on a dimension, you're removing the rows that don't have that value from your analysis. And the important thing to remember that is because, we're saying don't consider this at all. So the answer you're going to get that gets returned to you is blind to something else. So you'll see in this image on the left that if we had filtered for a dimension is equal to round, we'll only see the dimensions or the fruits returned that were round. We know nothing really about the ones that are not round. So when you filter on a dimension, only a subset of the data is considered for your analysis. The rest is removed before your aggregations do anything else. So if we said how many pieces of each fruit type are in the basket, if we only included round fruits, we would see that in Looker, you would put a filter of is round yes, and then if you selected fruit type in the count measure, you would see only apples and oranges returned, and you would see, our 3 apples and our 2 oranges. The result set knows nothing about our oblonged bananas, limes, and lemons. It's important that, and the count only has 5. So when you have a filter in there, it's not truly representing the 12 pieces of fruit that I have in my basket. It's only going to show me the 5 because I filtered for where it's round. Another question that you might ask is by color, though. So how many pieces of each fruit type in the basket if I only include red and orange fruits? So if you did something like that, the first step is filtering on color, and you'll say is equal to orange and red, or red, sorry, not and, or red. And so you'll see that in my final result set now, it only has me showing 2 apples and 2 oranges. So originally we saw that we had 3 apples, but because I filtered on color, you'll see that my green apple is grayed out. You can't even really tell it's green, but I know it's green. Is grayed out, so it's not part of the analysis. So the count that returns for my apple is only 2 because I filtered for the color of orange and red. So my green apple is removed from the analysis. Any questions on filtering on dimensions? Does it make sense? Alrighty. So the one that gets a little bit trickier is filtering on measures. So when you're filtering on a measure, it's a little bit different. So same practice data set, but if you ask the question of what types of fruit have exactly 2 pieces in the basket, when you filter on a measure, you actually do consider the whole data set because the only way that you can filter on a measure is after the aggregation is done. So in this example, you said that you wanted a fruit basket is equal to 2. So your database is first going to count all of the different fruit types that you have, and then afterwards, it'll say, oh, I only want to show banana, lime, and orange because those are the ones that only equal 2. So the final result set that you're going to see is only banana, lime, and orange, but it's important to remember that apple and lemon were part of your analysis, but you filtered them out sort of like after, essentially. You'll only ever see banana, lime, and orange in Looker, but it's important to think about when you're filtering on a measure that in the back end, lemon and apple were considered part of the analysis. Where this could get a little bit more complicated is asking about, which fruit has an average price less than 50 cents. So, first, what you're going to have to do is calculate the average price of each of the fruits, and then afterwards do a less than. So you'll see that only lemons and limes came back for the final result set because those were the only ones that were less than 50 cents. Again, all of the fruit was considered in the analysis, but the final result will only show lemons and limes. Any questions on filtering on measures? It's a little bit different than dimensions. In general, probably filtering on a measure will take more time. That's correct, because there's more being considered in the analysis. It's just like interesting questions can be asked with it. Typically, like the second example, I think is probably a little bit more realistic. If you were saying like, if you were calculating like the average revenue per customer and you want to say like, oh, I only want to see my customers that, brought in on average like $100 or something, you know, that's where like filtering on a measure would make sense. The last concept is pivoting. And so pivoting allows you to sort of like rearrange the data so that it looks a little bit more logical. Probably my best description I can give for pivoting. And so with pivoting, it really helps make analysis easier because you may have like a result set like this on the left where I'm displaying color is round and the count, but it's not immediately clear that a specific color may not have like a fruit that is round or is not round, and pivoting can help with that. So if we pivot the data in Looker, what you'll get is a result set more like this on the right, where you can more clearly see that I don't have not round orange and red fruits, and I don't have any round yellow fruit. So I'm going to toggle back to the last slide. So when you're clicking in multiple dimensions, you know, of data, you may get a result set that looks like this. But if something in your data is naturally few categories, like a yes/no flag or even a color, it can be helpful to pivot those types of data with the measure in the middle so that you can clearly see more easily sort of the gaps between the data, essentially. So pivoting sort of helps aid that, and you'll get some practice with that later. So the end result, if you pivoted the data from a pictorial example, would look something like the right, where you're sort of like arranging the data physically. So any questions on sort of like those core concepts? They're pretty simple. We'll get some practice with some flight data that we're going to look at in just a second. Alrighty. So we're going to now pull in some more real life examples, let's say, of looking at flight data so that you can get some practice with it as well. And get some practice in Looker. So I'm going to share a link inside of the chat to everybody. If you can pull that open. Can everybody, I just posted it to everyone. It's a trainembed.corp.looker.com. And I'm going to pull up a similar version of it, but slightly different. And should be like an Airports Explorer. It should look basically from like this Explore pane down. Was everybody able to get to it? Awesome. So the first thing you're going to do when you pop into Looker, let me make sure you guys, okay, cool. You guys also have like the newer Explore pane on the left. So anytime I pull into a data set or an Explore inside of Looker, I find it helpful to think about like, oh, what am I looking at? What am I doing in here? Good Explore practices will have like a description of the Explore. I don't think any of ours do. Like this one does. It says, you know, start here for information about flights. Those types of things can be helpful. So I find it helpful to like ground myself in understanding like, oh, what is this Airports Explorer trying to show me? So typically looking through the dimensions here, you can see that I have a view label here called an airport, sorry. And so I can imagine that what each row of data is probably representing is individual airports. So let's say, for example, and I can confirm that by, you know, maybe pulling in like a code and I'll filter on it. And let's say, you know, I'm in Chicago, so I'll search for like ORD and we'll see pretty quickly how many airports come back. hopefully one. And so, you know, I can see here that I have an airport code, and then, you know, I can see Chicago O'Hare International Airport, and only one row comes back. So if I take, you know, my ORD filter out, you know, I can imagine that I'm probably going to get a list of about 500 different airport codes or whatever. So what this helps me do is understand, like, oh, the data I'm looking at is airport codes, and then you can also see here that there's also airports that I've never heard of. That's, you know, probably inclusive of like private airports as well. So I just sort of use that every time I come into an Explorer, just to understand, like, what is the data I'm looking at, because it makes it easier to understand, like, oh, what question am I trying to answer? If you're on a Mac, you can use, if you guys were following along, to clear your screen, there's a few different ways you can do that now. Inside of In Use, you'll see two options of Clear All or Clear Fields and Keep Filters. If you're a hotkey person, the Clear All has a hotkey of Command K if you're on a Mac. I believe it's Control K if you're on Windows. So the first question we're going to walk through here is answering the question of how many airports are there? So this one's pretty simple. So you'll see down here I have different measures. And if you remember from our fruit basket example, count measures are typically things of like, oh, I want to count my data. So I'll bring in my airport count, and I'll click Run. And you'll see that I get back, really tiny and hard to read, 19,793. I'm in what we call our data pane. There's three main panes inside of Looker. Optionally, I don't know if you guys do see. Yeah, you'll see that there's a Results tab. If you're comfortable with SQL, this is like what Looker's generating for you in the background. Just as a heads up. You may or may not see that inside of your personal instances. It's depending on permissions. So the first pane here is our data pane. So this is, I typically open up this pane when I'm doing like my initial data gathering of like, oh, I'm trying to pull XYZ information. When I finish up like, oh, I got the answer I wanted, I'll typically collapse my data pane, and then I'll open up my visualization pane, just so that I have like the most screen real estate to work with. So because I only selected one measure, Looker automatically selected my single value viz. But there are a bunch of different visualization options up here at the top that you can toggle between if you wanted to do like a table or a column. But I'll stay with my single value viz. And I'm not going to apply any filters, so I'm just going to keep it collapsed. Just again, I like having all of my screen real estate possible. So this is our total count of airports. So what I'm going to do so that we can, I'm going to save this to a dashboard just so that when we start to work through that, so I'll call it my airports dashboard. I'll save that, and I'll call this count of all airports. And I'll save it to the dashboard so that we can look at it later, later on. So any questions around, oh, sorry, one other thing. You'll see a lot of little gear icons inside of Looker. They're typically where additional settings are stored, generally. So inside of the visualization pane gear icon is where you'll be able to modify anything having to do with visualizations. Inside of a data pane, you know, you may have additional options to filter, hide it. If you have access, you can go to the LookML or remove fields as well. Or you can also remove fields over here in the use field picker as well. So gear icons typically store additional settings, and then anything having to do, you guys don't really see this one up here. You only have limited options up here, but this is probably more representative of what you see in your own instances within each of your own companies. So pretty simple to ask a simple question. So I'm going to give you guys just a few minutes to answer the question around what is the average elevation across all of the different airport facilities and show that as a single value viz. And then if you have time, there's 2 challenges as well. The first one will be changing the text color and then also setting a title for the airport as well for the visualization. So I'll give you guys probably like 2-3 minutes to do that, and then I'll walk through the example. If you guys have any questions, feel free to come off of mute or ask them in the chat. Alrighty, this one is pretty simple. So I'm going to go back into my Airports Explorer, Command K. And so 2 different ways that you can search. Our Explorer here is pretty small, but you can also use the search feature up here. You'll see that, it says, hey, look at these popular fields. And if you see that, oh, it looks like everybody's clicking on airport elevation. So you'll see that I have a measure here called average elevation. So I'll click that into my Explorer and I'll go ahead and click run. And so you should get a number that returns as 1,143. And that's sort of as I hinted earlier, inside of the gear icon is where you'll find all of the additional options. So you can set, the color to like, let's do blue. And then you can also do a title override here for average airport elevation. I'm not sure why it's not showing. It just might have to do that. It needs to be on like a dashboard. So I'll add that in here. And then I'll go ahead so that we have it available later. I'm going to save this to my airports dashboard with average airport elevation. So I'll save this to my dashboard. So any questions on making, like small modifications or changing colors of single value visits? Pretty simple. Awesome. So the next one we're gonna have you guys work through is doing like an example of where we combine the 2 together. So single value visits, they're really good for like the top of your dashboards, key KPIs. There's like the big splashy numbers that, C-suite executives love to see. So you can typically think of like when you're looking at a dashboard, like maybe having some splashy numbers at the top, and then, as you're building out, sort of like refinements probably of those measures at the top. And so the example we're going to work through next is, so I know that there's, 16,000 different airports or something. But I might want to say like, oh, what if I wanted to see only like the top 10 by state, for example? So, originally we ran a pretty easy count. But what if I wanted to do it by state, for example? So you'll see that when I click in state, in this pale blue, my dimension shows up sort of like in this pale blue, and my measures show up as orange. And then I'm also going to put a sort on the airport count as well. So if you click the header down in the data pane, you'll see that an arrow shows up, and this will sort my result. So the first thing we'll do is just, run it for each state. I'm expecting 59 rows. That probably makes sense because it probably includes like the Virgin Islands and, some null results. Guam gets included. So, it's still domestically the United States, just includes some territories and stuff. And so, I can see here now I have, all of my results. You might want to only show like top 10, right? Because if you do like a column chart, the data might get, my visualization isn't changing. Let me refresh my screen. On my very large screen, it's pretty simple to see, but if it was like a small tile, it becomes a little bit harder to see. And you might really want to draw people's eye to like the top 10. So there's a few different ways you can do it. You can set a row limit on the data here to 10, and then you can run it again. And we'll see now that I only get 10 rows returned. So that's one way you can do it. You'll see that there's a warning about the row limit reached, but that won't be viewable from like your dashboard, for example. There's also occasionally options to limit displayed rows inside of the visualization options. So, I might want to only show maybe my first 5, for example. So there's an option there as well. In my data, 10 rows came back, but you'll even see in my data pane that it grayed out where I hid the data, essentially. 2 different ways to do it. If you're looking for probably best practice, I would do something like a row limit, because that'll return like a smaller query from the dashboard, smaller data set, smaller physical data in the background. So probably doing like a row limit, it might be one option, but the visualization option is one to do as well. If you're dependent on returning maybe a larger result set for like a table calc you might have done. So I'll save this to my dashboard. My airports dashboard, we'll call this top 10 state airports. And I'll click save the dashboard. I'm very curious about these 1,800 plus airports that are in Texas. We will get to that. But first, I'm going to have you guys sort of probably try and break that down for me. So for this one, what I'll want you guys to do is identify the top 5 facility types with the highest average elevation, and display the results as a bar chart. See if you can also show the total number of airport facilities in the same chart. Challenge 1 will be to add labels, and then challenge 2 would be to show each measure on a separate axis. So I'll give you guys probably like 3-4 minutes to do this example, and then I'll walk through the example together. Alrighty. How's everyone doing? Probably another minute? Okay, got one done. Give you guys like 30 more seconds. So for this one, the first thing we're going to do is first pull in the facility type. I'm just going to run this because I'm curious what the options are. You know what, I'm going to run it with that count too because, you know, I'm sort of thinking about that 16,000 number and I'm like, no way. Okay. So you can see, you know, I'm just doing some like, okay, so there's 13,000 airports. There's also like heliports, which I think that's the thing that helicopters land on. And then there's also like balloon ports and glider ports as well. So, you know, definitely more than I would originally have considered a type of airport, but I sort of understand now. So the thing we were asking about was not only the elevation, but also, or sorry, not only the count, but we were also asking about the elevation. If you ever want to move measures around, you just sort of click the header and move it around. So that'll, you know, way to shift your data. You can't shift like a dimension inside of between two measures. Your dimensions always have to be to the left and then your measures are to the right. So I'll go ahead and run this. The first thing that our challenge asked us about was the top 5 by highest elevation. So you'll see that I have my sort on count where I should have it on the elevation. So let me sort on elevation in descending order, and then I'm only going to pull in the top 5. So I'll do a road limit there. So I'll lose those other 2. And then next what we wanted to do was around adding labels to the side of each bar. So you can do that by going into quiz options. Inside of values, you'll see that there's option for including value labels. So that's where you'll find that. And then the other thing was to move each of the measures to a separate axis. So you can see that inside of the Y, you'll see that both of them are located on the bottom right now, and you'll see that's called bottom 1 because it includes both. But if you drag and hold it, you'll see that it says drag series here to create a new bottom axis. I can add that as well. So I can have like 2 bottom ones. I can also move one up to the top as well. So you can have them each independent, and you'll see that the axes are colored with the color of the measure that they're representing. So pretty simple. Any questions on that? I'll call this high elevation airports, and I'll save that to my dashboard. So our Airports Explorer, you can go into a bunch of different questions about it, but you know, the answers that you'll get are pretty simple. So we're going to switch to a new data set, and we call it our flights data. So I'm going to share a link to you guys in the chat. Let me know if you can get to that. So you should see an Explorer that loads similar to this. You'll see I have my little info icon now that says, oh, this is about flights. And you'll see that there's a lot more complexity to this data, to say lightly. Awesome. Looks like people were able to get into it. So for this one, sort of similar exercise that I did the Airports Explore, ask some questions about it. What am I looking at, etc. And so you'll see here on the left, it's helpful to, I think of like these view labels as sort of like, like a legend to like a book or something, or like an index. So you'll see that, I have my flight here. I have flight details. So this has like my arrival date, where I was going, the time of the flight. I have my departure date inside of here. So that's all, helpful information. But then I also have some like what I'll call like master data as well. So, I have information about the carrier. So, you have your code, name, and nickname, for example. You'll have like the aircraft information, where the aircraft was going, a lot more information about the aircraft, what model it is, anything about the flight facts. So, like at that time of the flight, what was the lifetime distance that the plane had flown at that time. So, high level information like that. So it's helpful to like sort of walk through this. So what I'll first do is I'm going to find my departure date or departure week. So I'm just going to search into my search up here, and you'll see that I have a bunch of different time options for depart. And that's pretty common inside of Looker, because, sometimes you might want to look at the individual day, even maybe the hour of the day that the flights are occurring. But for our analysis, we're just going to choose departure week. So I'm going to add that to my table. And then I'm also just going to add like a simple count. So I'll search for count. You'll see that there's a bunch of different counts. Generally it's good practice that the counts should have probably better descriptive names. But you'll see that I have different counts of like flights, carriers, aircraft models. So I'm looking for a count of flights, because that'll be descriptive of like sort of like what each row of data looks like in my database. And then lastly, I'll also want to filter, let's look at like the year 2000. So inside of my departure date, you can select is in the year, and we'll do the year 2000. And then I'll go ahead and click run. So as this runs, we'll see that it's sorted by the departure week. And if I pull open a visualization, because I only selected a singular time dimension and a count, Looker by default selected like a line visualization. And you can see in the year 2000 that we had a bunch of traffic around the beginning of the year, and then it dropped off for basically for the remainder of the year. And then probably the reason for the jump from here to here is because this is probably like a partial week of the data essentially, because we filtered on the year 2000. Remember, when you filter on a dimension, we removed from our analysis everything else about the flight information. So that's probably why it's only at 52,000 and then jumps up to 214, because it's most likely a partial week. So I'll save this to my dashboard, and we'll say flight in 2000. And I will save that to a dashboard. So for the next example that you guys will work through is, let me pull up the question, is find the number of flights that were canceled each week in the year 2000, and then display them as a line chart. Change the style of the data point for challenge 1, and then challenge 2 would be to add a reference line to show the average number of canceled flights across all of the weeks. So I'll give you guys like 3-4 minutes to work through that example. Alrighty. We'll jump into this example. So for this one, we had a few different ways that we can do it. So it'll be interesting to see sort of which options you guys selected. So the first thing we'll do is I'm going to do Command K, clear out my palette. I'll open my data pane. It's sort of how I work. And I'm going to use that same depart week. So, and I'm inside my Airports Explorer, wrong Explorer. Clear this out. So I know that I want my depart week, so I can add it to my table here. And then I'm also going to want to find canceled flights. So there's probably two different ways that you could do this one. There is a status code, there's an arrival status. So that's one way that you could have potentially like maybe filtered on this to say like, oh, I only wanted my flights and do like a count. But you'll also see that if I typed the word canceled, there's a canceled count in here as well. So your LookML developer in your organization might have already answered like pretty common requests or whatever. So we'll bring in that canceled count and the departure week. And then additionally, we'll want to filter for the year 2004. And so we'll go ahead and run this one. And so you probably got an example that looks, similar to this. Peak cancellations occurring around Christmas, which I guess that makes sense because probably bad weather. Maybe a hurricane. I'm not sure. You might want to investigate, world events that were occurring as to, why it was above, like the rest of the data. So for the challenge questions, the first one was changing the point. So if you go into a series, you'll see that there's a point style, and you can click it to be like filled or outlined. And then inside of cancel count, you might want to change it to like an upside down triangle or something like that. And then the second challenge was adding a reference line. So inside of the Y panel, you'll see down here at the bottom in markings, there's an option to add a reference line. So if you click that, you'll see that there's different options. So we'll just do a line, and then there's different types of lines. You can do like a median or an average or a max. So it'll, now it's more, you're more easily able to see in the data when a week was, above or below the average essentially. So I will save this to my dashboard, and we'll call it canceled flights. And I'll click save. So pretty simple. And then the last thing that we need to work through, sort of like working through our different foundations, is pivoting data and finding like a good example for that. So for this one, what we'll do is we'll clear out our palette. And let's say we wanted to know the difference between like long and short flights, for example, by like by the carrier. So you'll remember inside a carrier I had, like their name or nickname or code. So I'll pull in the name of the carrier, and I'll run this sort of like in the background so I can see what the values return as. Ooh, they're like really long. Let me pull in nickname and see if that's like a nicer, because like, it's like American Airlines, and then like it's just American. So like the nickname's probably more the names we're familiar with. So I will take out the carrier name, and we'll stick with the carrier nickname. And then the thing that we wanted then is, we could, pretty easily ask about accounts, right? And so if I run this, I can sort on my flight count and, very easily see that, Southwest has, the most flights. followed by Delta, American, United, which are, our four most common carriers in the US. But what we were asking about was if they're short or not. So you'll see that over here, there's like, is it a long flight? And you'll see that Looker denotes it with like a yes, no. So similar to like what we were doing before, if you add it in just as like a regular dimension and didn't pivot on the data can be sort of hard to read. I could sort first on the carrier, and then if you hold your shift key, you can add like a second sort. So I can positionally see the data, but it's probably not the easiest way that we can consume it. And it also now I'm trying to scan through and understand, 44 rows of data. What would be easier to do is if you click this pivot data option, or you can also pivot or unpivot data inside of the gear icon. And if we run this, we'll get that same unique list of carriers, but now I'm more easily able to see my short flights or my long flights positionally. And even in a table, this isn't totally readable, I would say. But if we chose like a bar chart and changed it to stacked, and maybe if we sorted, instead of on the name, if we sorted on the yes flight count, now we're able to see that, American has the most long flights, for example, followed by United, Delta, Continental, obviously prior to merger, Northwest also prior to merger, and then you'll see Southwest has the fewest, of those original four, big carriers. Southwest has the most flights still, but it's, ranked 5th in terms of having long flights as compared to, it's predominantly short flights. So, different ways that you're able to like sort the data. So I'll go ahead and save this to our dashboard. Carrier flights, let's say, and we'll save that to the dashboard. So with pivots, being able to arrange the data to be more oriented this way opens up a lot in terms of the visualizations of being able to more easily understand the data. So for the last 10 minutes, what I'm going to do is pivot over to sort of walking us through the different dashboard options. So I was saving each of these to my airports dashboard. I'm going to refresh this page, and you'll see now that I have all the different visualizations that we had earlier. You'll also notice that this is our newer version of what's called Dashboards Next, identifiable person most immediately, how it's rendered. What you may see inside of your own instance is what we call now Legacy Dashboard, which is more of a layout like this. And you can toggle in and out of it by upgrading or downgrading the dashboard. So what we'll do on this one is if I go in and edit the dashboard, you'll see that I'm able now to, resize tiles. So we had a few tiles that were like high-level KPIs. So those I might make larger across here at the top. So you just sort of positionally those. You may have more than just like 2 KPIs in your organization, but for our examples, we only have these 2. So I'll stretch them up, pretty tall up here at the top and make them pretty small though, because when you save them, that title that you give it will show up underneath, so they don't need like a ton of screen real estate. I'll go back into edit. And then you may positionally, our charts are pretty all over the place. So, you might make some bigger. You might do something where you do like a 2, 3. You might do something like this, where you make, your line charts a little bit bigger. And then you can always have the option of having, like a really big chart down here at the bottom. This is helpful for if you have like a large data table or something that, your end users would be able to see. So you can move around tiles via like the 6 little dots up here, and you'll see that I can drag to reorder them. And then you can change the size here by navigating. And Looker will always, in general, flow them all together. So regardless of the size of my screen, Looker will try and smart rearrange the data to the best look. So I'll save our dashboard. And it did something. We lost our all of our tile things because I was messing around with the screen real estate and it saved it. So we'll rearrange these pretty quickly, get them back in order. Thought we had them before. Sorry about that. I'll shrink this guy up, so it shoots that up. Cool. So now we have a nicer looking dashboard, but it'd probably be a lot more interactive if we had filters probably. So I'm going to click Edit Dashboard again, and you'll see that Filters is located up here at the top, and then you'll click Add Filter. So what it's going to do now, and this is part of the newer experience, is it'll first pull up the different explorers that you have available. So you can always search across all of the different options. So if I was looking for departure date, for example, I can easily select that now, and I can also select, it might be something like a date range, a single day, or time frames, for example, of last 90 days, or you might stick with a standard configuration option if you like sort of the traditional approach. So our data is pretty old, so I'll just set it to the year 2007 for the default. And then there's an option to show it inline, so I'll show you what that looks like. So if I click Add, you'll see that it's presented in line with the dashboard filters. But if I change it over to a popover, you'll see now that when you click the text, the filter appears in here. This is a good option if you have a bunch of different options that it'll have the short text presented here, and then inside of it, it'll have all of the different options. So I'll switch this one back to inline, for example, but then I'll add in a new filter for the carrier, for example. So I'll bring in the carrier nickname. And so you might do something like what's called a tag list. And you'll see that we default it into the popover menu. And so if I add this to the dashboard, you'll see that a tag list, allows you to select, multiple options. So this is why that popover is nice, because you only see the small ones. But you also might do something like checkboxes. You might do a big button group or whatever, so that when you click inside of it, you have a lot nicer of a way of being able to, visually show the different carriers. So that's why that popover menu is nice, because it captures all of the different buttons sort of inside of it. And then you might also add a filter in what we call our overflow menu as well. So, you might search for an aircraft model code. I think that's the 787. And you'll see that there's an option. We'll do the button group again. Oop, too many. We'll stick with, we'll put in the overflow menu. We'll do the tag list. And so in the overflow menu, you'll see that there's a more option here. And then there's an option now to, select what type of aircraft codes you're looking for. And then obviously, as you update your filters, you'll see that the update button will allow you to now rerun the filters specifically for what data you had selected. So filters got a lot visually nicer, and there's a lot more options that are customizable for what you're looking for. And then inside of what to update, by default, Looker will enable for whatever field you had selected, the tiles that are related to that. And for example, our airports Explorer doesn't, necessarily have any carrier names, but you can, if there was a field, you can go in here and manually find it as well. So that's how you would change to update the fields. So pretty simple to, update filters and have like a nice visual to them. There's also a collapse to hide the filters. So, visually filters may take up a lot more real estate, but you can collapse them now and uncollapse them as you're working through a dashboard, for example. So you can have a lot more filters, but then you can just sort of hide them all up here at the top and be able to still visually see your whole dashboard. The last thing that we'll go through then is just talking about the different scheduling options. So obviously, after you've gotten a dashboard that you find that you want to send out to people, you can schedule a delivery. By default, there's a bunch of different ways. You'll see that if I wanted to send like a daily or an hourly update of my dashboard reports, you'll see that the keyword here says schedule. And then there's options of, where do I want to send it? Do I want to send it to Slack, to Amazon S3? Who am I sending it to? The format that I want to send it. But if you just wanted to send it once, there's an option in here that says send now. And you'll see that doesn't say schedule. This might be something if I wanted to send it, just one time, I might say, hey, just go send this dashboard now. Not scheduled, but you have the ability to do it. There's also the ability to download, and then there's also those same boards as I was mentioning before. So I might go find Adam's really cool board, and I'll be able to throw it into an untitled section, and now I'll pin it to that board. So now when I go back to look at my Adam's really cool board, you'll see in an untitled section, oh, I must have pinned it to a different board. Must have multiple Adam's boards. I don't know what board I pinned it to now. Let's go pin it to the right board. Adam's really cool board. Which one do I have up here? That was my really cool board. Should have pinned it to it. You can pin these, two different boards as another way to surface them to end users. So we have a question that came in. Is there a way to make the current date today the default value? Yeah. So if we wanted it to be like today, what you would want to do is if you select is in the last one day, because you selected just in the last one day, that's inclusive of today. So that's effectively saying from the time period of, inside of Eastern time zone, midnight to 11:59 p.m. Is if you do is in the last one day, and you could set that as the default. That's, the same as saying like today, essentially. Good question. Does anybody else have any other questions about filters or scheduling? Alrighty. So just so you guys are aware, the slides are available. Sorry, I just have to get to the end. If you go to training.looker.com, under the additional resources, you'll see there's a PDF available to you. And then if you go to it as well, let me copy the link to you guys. You can also fill out a form for feedback on the training today. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if you guys have any other questions. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a good day.